During World War II, soldiers often faced, well, just unrelenting conditions where snow buried trenches, rain turned fields into mud, and freezing winds cut through every layer of clothing. Survival wasn't about bravery alone, it depended on ingenuity and adaptability. With no tents, limited supplies, and freezing ground beneath them, soldiers had to transform the environment around them into protection. Every hack they used, from scavenged timber to mud-insulated walls, was tested in the harshest winters and the worst battlefield conditions of the 20th century. These shelters were never luxurious, they were lifelines, and while they were designed for survival in combat, the methods reveal lessons about resilience, creativity and resourcefulness that remain, fascinating for anyone curious about history or human ingenuity. Trench covers with corrugated iron and logs. Open trenches shielded soldiers from bullets but exposed them to the weather. Snow would pile high, and rain quickly turned trenches into mud traps. Soldiers scavenged corrugated iron from wrecked warehouses, railcars and barns. When metal wasn't available, heavy logs filled the gaps. Laid across the trench tops, these materials formed makeshift roofs anchored with mud, soil or sandbags. The result was a covered trench that blocked snow, rain and even some shrapnel. In those bitter winters, a simple layer of corrugated iron combined with mud provided protection from freezing nights. The lesson is clear. With limited resources, careful layering of simple materials can dramatically improve survival odds. For soldiers exposed to icy winds, shallow trenches weren't enough. They needed walls that could hold back the cold. The solution was a deeper dugout lined with sandbags and reinforced with mud. Mud hardened to trap warmth and repel moisture, creating a small underground haven where soldiers could survive the harshest weather. Even without modern materials, dugouts allowed for controlled fires, safe breathing and relative warmth. The brilliance of this method lay in accessibility. Sandbags were standard issue, and mud was everywhere. While heavy rain sometimes softened walls, the principle of improvising with available resources remained a key takeaway. Poncho liantos and shelter halves were, honestly, a lifeline for soldiers on the move. Without the luxury of permanent dugouts, they really couldn't afford to get too comfortable. Rain would soak their uniforms, and mud, well, it could just about swallow their boots whole. So canvas ponchos or shelter halves became these ingenious portable solutions. Tied between rifles or trees, these simple sheets created lean-tos that protected soldiers and their gear from the worst of the elements. By combining several shelter halves together, groups of soldiers could actually form larger temporary shelters. The insulation, sure, wasn't much to write home about, but these quickly deployable structures often made the difference between surviving exposure or, succumbing to frostbite. Speed, mobility and a bit of improvisation, those were really the defining factors out there. Snow quinges and foxholes. Now, here's where things get interesting. Snow itself, believe it or not, became both a threat and a tool. Soldiers would pack and hollow out the snow, transforming it into small shelters that resembled igloos. Inside these, temperatures could rise quite a bit compared to the freezing air outside. Foxholes, too, adapted in a similar way, reinforced with branches or tarps to keep out the cold and damp. It was all about making do with whatever was at hand. Even a small candle could add crucial warmth. While fragile and requiring careful construction, snow shelters demonstrated the principle of converting environmental challenges into advantages, a lesson that holds for anyone interested in survival techniques. Shallow trenches often collapsed under snow rain or artillery fire. Soldiers dug deeper and reinforced their roofs with timber. Covered with soil or snow, these bunkers blended into the landscape and offered protection from the elements and enemy observation. Inside, heat could be retained and small stoves or fires operated safely. This technique underscores a wartime principle. Layering simple materials multiplies protection. It also highlights how resourcefulness often outweighs raw strength. In ruined towns, wood was scarce, but rubble, broken bricks and stones were abundant. Soldiers stacked these materials into windbreaks that dramatically reduced exposure to icy gusts, protected fires, and allowed brief relief from storms. By packing gaps with mud or leaning doors against walls, these windbreaks became more stable. This improvisation shows the value of seeing utility in discarded materials and turning them into practical defences against nature. Survival also depended on remaining unseen. Camouflage nets designed to hide vehicles and equipment were repurposed as overhead shelters. Stretched over foxholes or dugouts and weighted with mud, foliage or branches, these nets disrupted visibility while blocking snow and rain. Properly implemented, these nets allowed soldiers to rest in relative safety while remaining hidden from aircraft and patrols. Concealment and shelter could be combined to increase survival odds, a lesson in creative adaptation. Raised wooden duckboards and platforms, were a real lifesaver. Mud claimed as many men as the cold or rain, trenches became swamps, and standing in wet soil led to illness and exhaustion. Wooden duckboards raised soldiers above the muck. Platforms elevated sleeping areas and storage, keeping gear and men dry. Even simple branches or crates worked when wood was scarce. While not perfect, these measures highlight a fundamental survival principle. Avoid unnecessary exposure whenever possible, even by just a few inches. The shelters of World War II were, often crude and improvised, yet each one carried timeless lessons. Survival depended on ingenuity, adaptability, and making the smartest use of whatever materials were at hand. Ordinary items, timber, mud, snow, stones and canvas, were, transformed into extraordinary protections. Even today, these techniques honestly still inspire campus history enthusiasts and anyone who's curious about human resilience. They show us that resourcefulness, creativity and determination often matter more than, say, comfort or technology. History, you see, is so much more than just stories of battles. It's really a record of human problem-solving under the most extreme conditions. Understanding these shelters helps us, preserve the ingenuity and resilience that ensured survival in one of history's harshest periods. If you love uncovering hidden historical survival techniques, go ahead and subscribe now and share this video. Every story we revive brings a bit more insight into the resourcefulness and resilience that defined generations and, continues to inspire today's adventurers.